Hello everyone, I'm Andrew. I'm at the University of South Florida. I am a second-year clinical psychology student and I work under John Rottenberg. We're going to be talking about some pretty happy things today, depression. Namely, we're going to talk about depression's image. Oftentimes we talk about what is depression, what kind of defines depression. I'm going to talk to you about kind of messages and what people believe about depression. So overview, my goals are to discuss what it means when I'm saying the image of depression, what do we need to rebrand if there is anything to rebrand. Overview, a YouTube content analysis, which is kind of an example of all the messages that are kind of out there and kind of how people perceive and present depression. And then, why is this important? The critical review and implications of these different types of messages. Okay, so what is the image of depression? So to start, let's get on the same page with definitions. When I say image, I'm kind of putting a few combinations of words together. I'm referring to the public messages, presentations, and beliefs about depression. And so I'm combining beliefs and presentations and information about depression because they kind of go hand in hand. So you guys all saw my title. I'm going to talk about a YouTube content analysis. So if we imagine the images that we see maybe in a YouTube video, as a viewer, they will affect my beliefs, and then maybe I'm a YouTuber as well, and then so I'll make my own video, and then that kind of goes hand in hand. So it's kind of this bi-directional relationship. Honestly, I'm not sure what is not a bi-directional relationship in psychology. So again, what is the image of depression? So we often think about depression based on the DSM-5 criteria, all these symptoms. But the truth is, all of us in this room have a different idea of what depression is. What are the causes of depression? Do we think it's a biological disorder, environmental? Do we think it's a biopsychosocial thing? How long does depression last? Do people in this room view depression as something that's more chronic and lifelong? Or do people think it's more short-lived? Continuum presentation. So, do we think people with depression are categorically different? Do we think depression is this well-defined, distinct entity? Or do we think it's like a spectrum of kind of low mood, everyday life experiences that sometimes get us down? To what extent is depression within a person's control? How likely is recovery from depression? Is depression, again, like treatable, or does somebody kind of just get depression and then you can cope with it but not really do much after that? And what types of treatments? And we'll kind of go through some examples. And are there any strengths or advantages with depression? Okay, so again, kind of go over some examples, so causes. The media presents depression as being maybe a disease and it's not a phase. If you just Google depression, you see instantly an image of the brain. That implies that depression is this biological brain disease, but there's also research and media that says depression is more a stressful environment. Maybe some trauma, maybe some childhood experiences that lead to depression. Cognitive psychologists say it's a series of negative thoughts. Other people say it's a result of lack of diet and exercise and healthy living. Again, is depression this chronic disease, or is it just a temporary thing that will pass with time? Again, is depression this categorical thing, or is it viewed on this spectrum where we all have a little bit of depression? Depression is defined by low mood, sleep problems, appetite changes, a lot of overlap with every other DSM disorder, especially anxiety, PTSD. Okay, and then what treatments are for depression? Medication, therapy, diet, exercise, mindfulness practices? Okay, and so all these beliefs that I'm talking about are based in theory from this common sense model of illness, which I'm going to simplify this for my own purpose and for presentation purposes. But basically the idea of this model is that there's this information and it affects your representation of the illness, all the representations they just talked about, causes, timeline, coping resources. right there. And ultimately, these beliefs lead to behaviors. So if we think about the images that are in the public sphere, so what's broadcast on the news, what's in the newspaper article, what's on YouTube, when somebody just types in depression as a YouTube video, it ultimately affects our beliefs, and then these beliefs affect people who have depression. So for instance, if I have depression, and I think depression is caused by a brain disease, my coping behavior might be I might seek out a psychiatrist and get some medication. It also affects kind of my self-stigma. So if I think I have this brain disease that's more chronic, will I have any hope to get better? Will I have any self-efficacy to, maybe if I see a therapist, to use these psychological strategies, stuff like that. But also, we have to think about how these beliefs affect people who are not clients or not patients, and how we interact with them. And so that's where this outsider stigma kind of comes in. Again, I'm going with this kind of brain disease model because I think within the public, this was my hypothesis, there was this whole movement to kind of view depression as this chemical imbalance thing, and so that's been mostly disseminated throughout the public sphere. So again, there's research to show that if I think my friend has a more chemical imbalanced version of depression, I might think that they're going to have it for longer, and there's that social support component. It might get really tired hanging out with them. We might view them to never get better, and then there might be increased social distance over time because people have to often take care of themselves and retreat. I can go into any of these, but I want to stay close to my time. Okay, so the point of this slide was to just say these images that are presented, they impact our beliefs, and these beliefs have downstream effects. So if these images have effects, well, what are the images in the public sphere? Unfortunately, no one's really looked at this or thought about it. So, introducing a YouTube content analysis. And so content analysis is basically, you kind of take some media and you have a code book and you code for specific messages. It can be the count for specific messages, it can be the endorsement of messages and then read into them more. I'm mainly just counting the different messages that are in the sphere. I'll go over my code book in a bit. And so people might think, why YouTube? Well, I don't know how many people know this, but people actually really consult YouTube for health information these days, especially in the realm of depression. You type in depression, and the first video, The Science of Depression, which sounds really fancy and legitimate, has almost 7,500,000 views. That's just one video, and so clearly people are indulging in these messages and likely sharing them, and this is kind of how this information spreads in the public sphere. And with YouTube, I can have a systematic analysis of that versus if I just try to gauge healthcare websites. I would make the argument that YouTube videos are a lot more emotionally engaging and more likely to be shared than the website on the National Institute of Health or just a Google search of Mayo Clinic. Okay, so what am I coding for? I told you content analysis, you code for information. I'm coding for everything that I just talked about. So what do the videos talk about with causes for depression? Do they present it as biological, environmental? Do they present depression as this well-defined, distinct construct? Do they say depression, you just get it and then you have it the rest of your life? Or actually, sometimes depression can resolve within a month. It could just be a really dark period for a short time. What treatment recommendations do they have? And so how did I conduct this content analysis? Oh boy, so it's kind of intimidating because I'm like, wow, there's thousands of videos out there. So I had to kind of make some compromises. My goal was to get a representative sample of the most viewed videos because that's the most pertinent to what's in the public sphere. So I did 12 basic search terms, and I tried not to overlap and bias my coding too much. For instance, I didn't type in recovery from depression because then clearly all those videos would talk about recovery. So I did my best to do that. So it was a combination of what I thought somebody would search, which is just depression, as long as when you actually type in something and like Google it, like autofills the most common things. I cleared my search browser, I did on incognito mode, so the results are not biased by my own internet searches. I included the first 50 videos because that kind of captures common sense internet behavior. If we think, I don't even know if people get past the 10th video before searching a new term. Screened all of them, screened 600 videos, took away the duplicates. Videos had to be English, relevant to depression, not like the Great Depression. And I watched videos that were 0 to 25 minutes long. I thought that was feasible, and that's usually how YouTube is consumed. But we did include videos that were over 25 minutes but had 500,000 views, again, to capture the most viewed messages. It was 2 coders, me and Ansley, who was the second author on this paper. And we developed a code book on these codes, and we established CAPA reliability on 25% of the videos, which is typical of this type of research. All right, so some quick results for demographics. This slide kind of proves that people are watching these videos. I included 332 videos in this analysis, and there's a lot of vloggers out there who like to talk about, hey guys, Nancy here, been a while since I posted, so I dealt with that. One way that we were able to code accurately was, again, so I didn't mention this on other script, we had all the transcripts, so that really helps in case we lost focus, we could reread the transcripts and we watched the videos a few times. But overall, the mean views was 470,000. The largest number was 8,600,000. Videos were on average 7 minutes. It's good to take the median, but at the same time, it's pretty telling that 45 videos had over 1 million views, 67 videos had over 500,000 views, and 134 had over 100,000 views. So I have evidence that people are viewing this information. Okay, so let's go through my code book. These are the results. I'll try to break down this table. What did these videos talk about with causes? So mostly videos talked about a biological cause, so like a chemical imbalance, brain damage, neurotransmitter imbalance, or environmental causes, so like stressful environments, childhood experience. Cognitive is just like negative automatic thinking, cyclical thinking. And so overall, of all the 332 videos, about half of them mentioned a biological cause, about 40% mentioned environmental cause, and we also coded of these videos, how many kind of had a supportive presentation of them. So that's how to interpret that. A really interesting finding is if you go onto the National Institute of Health or any kind of big psychology hub, the biopsychosocial model, which is depression is caused by a combination of biological, psychological, and social factors, was very lowly endorsed. And we made sure to code for that correctly. A lot of videos often said, some depression is biological, some depression is environmental. Those are different things than the interplay of these factors. To what extent is depression presented on a continuum? That's how we defined categorical and continuum. Overwhelmingly, videos presented a very simplified version of depression. They usually often just use the word depression. They often just said, people with depression are different. Very few people mentioned subtypes of depression, so that's kind of the intermediate category. Like if you mention, there's like chronic depression or hopelessness depression. At least acknowledging the subtypes mention that depression looks very different among people. And that's consistent with reality. In reality, there's a paper done by Eiko Fried. He looked at all these symptom profiles of people with depression, and he found that there's like over 1,000 different symptom combinations of depression. And so he did that through looking at responses to depression measures, and he found that very rarely do 2 people ever have the same symptoms or severity of depression. How do people present depression chronicity-wise? They present it as a more long-lived condition. So this is, again, kind of our definitions. Basic. We also have examples in our code book. I have a pie chart. Also, apologies for my pie charts. They aren't very beautiful. Overwhelmingly, though, people present depression as lasting between a year to a lifetime, like a very chronic condition. So while they presented depression as something that's chronic, a lot of videos did mention that depression is something that you can recover from. And so recovery was broken down in terms of, somewhat likely to improve, or depression is treatable, versus people with depression can get better and they can stay better. And so 60% of videos had that sort of positive message. And again, that's consistent with reality. Compared to other psychological disorders, depression is one of the more treatable disorders. Maybe not full symptom remission, but at least significant improvement to the point where it's definitely worth seeking treatment. With that said, 32% of all videos said that depression is a recurring disorder, so you'll have recurrent episodes. Lastly, that's an error. That's supposed to be treatment options, but it says in the title, most treatment options that were presented was medication and therapy, but at the same time, a significant portion of videos also mentioned mindfulness practices, so like meditation, breathing, diet and exercise. 30% of videos said, that really helps your body. Very few videos mentioned ECT or ketamine treatments, electroconvulsive shock therapy. We also coded, again, the supportiveness for these. I don't want to get into that. I don't think I have enough time. But it seems like mostly in the public, people think either medication or therapy are the treatments for depression. But it's good to see that people are a little bit more flexible with endorsing there are other things. You don't necessarily have to get this formalized treatment. Okay, so my basic conclusions, and I'll get quickly into my critical review. Depression is viewed as biological or environmental. It's viewed as chronic. People present as something that's fairly treatable, but then you could also probably get it again. And the most commonly recommended treatments are therapy, mindfulness practices, diet, exercise, and then medication was also mentioned. Okay, so why does this all matter? Well, as I alluded to earlier, causal beliefs have a significant impact on people's stigma and people's hope for recovery. So on the positive side, when somebody thinks depression is caused by a biological entity, it decreases the blame and takes the blame off the person. So we never blame somebody for cancer for getting cancer. Same with heart disease. Or relatively to psychological disorders, we blame them less. And so you see that with depression. But there are studies, experimental studies, and survey studies showing that biological messages for depression overall do not decrease stigma. In fact, it actually has the opposite effect. So it may increase perceptions of severity. It may decrease perceived controllability, so that self-efficacy component, which is really important for treatment and for outcomes. So it increases hopelessness for people with depression, and then if I think my friend has depression, it also increases my hopelessness for them. Leads to a preference for medication. I put that as a negative because there are many treatments for depression, and again, there's not just one answer. And so my thinking is I would like to encourage flexibility with many treatment options, and for trying many things, than just having a one-dimensional approach. It increases beliefs that people with mental illness are unpredictable, and it's related to stronger social rejection and perceived gruesomeness. So I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with this because I've just been engrossed in this. But it's really interesting, the stigma literature, that this is a consistent finding that biological presentations for mental illness do not really decrease stigma. They have some positive effects, but it's a little bit more complicated than automatically just people are more accepting. Why do continuum beliefs matter? Very similar. If we think somebody with a mental illness or with depression is different, then it might increase social distance. And then it also might decrease beliefs that somebody can recover. And again, a real life example, if I think my friend has depression and I think they're categorically different, I might view them as diseased, and I might view them as, well, they're just going to be like that their entire lives. If we think about the stigma of personality disorders, if somebody has borderline personality disorder, we think of those as something that's chronic, everlasting, and there's a lot of social distance there once people even learn that somebody has a diagnosis of that. So if we also think about other success stories with viewing things on a spectrum, we think about autism. And so I don't actually have empirical studies right now, I have them in my paper, but if we think about just adding the word spectrum to autism spectrum disorder, immediately in conversation we recognize there's a spectrum of severity. I'm hoping there's research on that. It'd be interesting if there's not. But if we also think about social movements with sexuality, once people start viewing sexuality on a spectrum, we start to humanize them more versus viewing them as these distinct entities or these other groups. Why does timeline matter? I did not anticipate having much time, so there might be a pro of viewing depression as something that's a chronic entity. 50% of cases with depression do have a chronic course. They do recur. 50% also tend to only get depression once. You usually hear about the former, but the reality is maybe somebody recognizing depression as something chronic, it might facilitate them to continue treatment and to continue treat it like something that's serious. It also might increase feelings of hopelessness. I'm not for or against anything. I'm just hoping that people think about these things more critically and recognize the pros and cons. Okay, so my takeaway is I think we need to think about how we're optimizing depression presentations in the public to increase treatment-seeking behaviors for a variety of treatments, not just medication, but increase the idea that, hey, there is no two depressions that are alike. For some people, therapy helps. For some people, medication. For some people, a combination. It's just increasing that psychological flexibility for the client/patient to get better. As well, we can also decrease stigma and think about something. And so I have this image of breast cancer on here because I think the pink ribbon movement is a really great inspiration for what we could do. So if we think about breast cancer, you know, it's not a hopeful thing. But it's not a hopeful course, but at the same time, there's a lot of support for people. So when somebody is diagnosed with depression, that person has internal stigma to even seek treatment, and there's also a stigma for if somebody hears that they're in treatment. When somebody gets diagnosed with breast cancer, it's expected that they'll get treatment, and it's expected that there will be that social support around them. I have not heard of one giant fundraising campaign for depression, despite its worldwide and United States prevalence. It is the #1 source of disability worldwide, yet I am not aware of a movement for depression that is akin to the pink ribbon movement. And so I'm not saying we should take funding away, I'm just saying we should learn about what these successful movements are doing and apply them to depression. And I think that's all I have. I don't know how I did on time.